So good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I'm going to go over some housekeeping and ground rules, but first we will do introductions. My name is Patty Jo Angelini, and I am the Communication Officer. Rebecca, you want to go next?
Yes, my name is Rebecca Nance, and I am Senior Legislative Advisor at the department.
And David?
I am David Gens, and I am also a Senior Legislative Advisor with the department.
And Jessica?
Hello, I'm Jessica Pracky. I'm the Public Affairs Specialist with the department.
And Janine?
Good afternoon, Janine Beatrice, Deputy Director here with the Oregon Employment Department. Thank you all for joining us today.
And David Gerstenfeld.
Good afternoon, David Gerstenfeld, Acting Director at the Oregon Employment Department.
So now David will provide an overview of employer tax rates and its relation to the health of the UI Trust Fund, and then remaining time will be for questions. But first, let me go to the ground rules. So please put your questions in the chat. David Gens and Rebecca Nance from Legislative Affairs will monitor the chat box and answer questions throughout this meeting. And questions will be answered in the order asked. If you have a question and you are a staff member, please also let us know the representative or senator for whom you work. If anyone is experiencing technical difficulties or unable to answer their questions, please email OED_legislative_affairs@oregon.gov. If your question is not about employer payroll taxes or the UI Trust Fund, we will put your question in our parking lot and we will follow up with you after this meeting. We will also answer your questions after David's presentation. If after David's presentation you have questions you'd like answered, please notify us in the chat. So that we can get through all of your questions during our hour, please limit yourself to one question and one follow-up question. If you're joining us by phone, please make sure to hit *6 to unmute yourself to ask your question. I'd now like to hand it over to David Gerstenfeld, Acting Director of the Oregon Employment Department.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I know that there are a lot of questions that you're hearing from your constituents that have businesses about unemployment insurance taxes, and that we're certainly hearing also, and that it's a nervous time for businesses as they're seeing new tax rates coming out while we're still in the middle of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the goal today is to share some information about how the unemployment insurance tax system works, how the tax rates are determined, how that relates to the solvency, to give a little bit of information and then give a chance to have some discussion to answer questions. I'm sure that there will be more discussions about this topic, but really wanted to at least give that initial baseline level of information so that if people have other questions or other ideas come up, that we can stay engaged and make sure that you all have the information that you need when you're making policy decisions. So I'll be sharing some information about how the tax rates are determined, but also want to give some context along the way. The lowest unemployment insurance payroll tax rate for this year, calendar year 2020, is 0.7%. Going into next year, the lowest tax rate will be 1.2%. We know that about 41% of all of the tax-paying employers in the state will be at that lowest rate of 1.2%. And we'll be throwing out a fair number of numbers also, because I don't think there's a way to talk about taxes and tax schedules without doing that. We do intend to send some follow-up information out within the next several business days also, so that you have that as kind of reference. The 2021 payroll tax schedule that we will be in is Schedule 4. The average payroll or tax rate in that schedule is 2.26%. And for 2021, the unemployment insurance tax is payable on the first $43,800 of wages paid to each employee. Over 93% of the businesses in Oregon will have a tax rate of 3.4% or less next year. As we're going through this, I don't want to hide the fact that having any increase in taxes is painful, and we know that, but want to make sure that as policy decisions are being made, people understand what the impacts are of various options that are available. This coming year, employers are not going to be replenishing all of the over $6 billion of benefits that we've paid out since the pandemic began. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's the case and what part is being replenished. The entire cost of the COVID-19 closures and the benefits paid to people resulting from the closures are not being allocated to employers. A main reason for this is most of the benefits that we've paid out have been federally funded under the CARES Act or under other legislation. And for those federally funded benefits, those get reimbursed to the trust fund. They're not chargeable to an employer's benefit ratio, so they don't impact employers' tax rates at all. We are projected to collect significantly less in payroll taxes in 2021 than we will be paying out in benefits next year, even when we're just looking at the part of the benefits that are chargeable to employers. So again, we're not really replenishing the fund. We're just slowing down the rate that we're eating into the reserves that have built up during the long economic growth cycle that we had before the pandemic. So I'm going to go over a few points, then we'll answer questions, and certainly want to answer as many as I can. And Rebecca and David, as we said, will gather those up. And if there's questions about other parts of the unemployment insurance program besides taxes, we'll kind of gather those up also and respond offline from this discussion about taxes. We did recently publish the tax rates for 2021. We do that every November for the following calendar year, and that's required by statute. Each year, some employers see their tax rates go up, some see them go down, and some see the tax rates stay the same. In Oregon, the way that our program is structured, Oregon employers receive the most credit against some federal payroll tax, their FUTA tax that is possible. There's a 6% federal FUTA payroll tax that employers owe. Oregon employers get a 5.4% credit. So instead of paying a 6% FUTA tax, they pay a 0.6% FUTA tax. And I'll talk about that. It may come up a little bit because depending on how things go, sometimes that tax credit can get reduced. And one of our goals is to maximize that tax credit. When states have to borrow money for their trust funds, employers in those states do frequently see reduced FUTA tax credits. The highest tax rate that an Oregon employer sees for unemployment insurance under any circumstance is 5.4%, and that's regardless of what tax schedule we're in or what experience rating we're in. There are 40 states that have a maximum tax rate higher than that. The kind of the outlier highest one is at about 18.5%. in some circumstances. And I mentioned that there's a what we call the taxable wage base, the amount of wages that tax is payable on, that goes up each year. A lot of the Oregon system is indexed so that it kind of self-adjusts as economic conditions change. So for 2021, it's the first $43,800 of wages that are taxable. And I mentioned that we're going to be in Schedule 4. There are 8 overall tax schedules for unemployment insurance rates. The lower the number, the lower the overall aggregate tax rates are. So tax schedule 1 is the lowest, tax schedule 8 is the highest. But again, in all of those, the highest tax rate that any employer will see is 5.4%. The determination of what schedule we're in is really based on the overall solvency of the trust fund. And then within each schedule, we do look at experience ratings. And I'll talk about that in just a second. I mentioned the 5.4% rate that is the highest rate that Oregon employers can see. Federal law does require that each state have at least one employer that pays 5.4% or more in state unemployment taxes. And that's why our cap is kind of at the minimum amount that the federal law requires. And our employers tend to be clustered more towards the bottom of our tax ranges, with a relatively small percentage seeing the higher tax rates within each tax schedule. The Oregon Trust Fund model is self-balancing. When more benefits are paid out of the fund, we have to collect more money to replenish that amount. Oregon tends to have a robust safety net in terms of the amount of benefits that people can receive, the weekly benefit amount, in terms of the number of weeks of benefits. So for instance, some states have fewer than 26 weeks of benefits, some of them down to as low as 12. And Oregon also tends to look at the experience rating part. We have more circumstances than many states in a normal time where even though people are getting benefits, those benefits aren't impacting the employer's experience rating. And that experience rating is really looking at the ratio of benefits that are paid to employees or former employees of a business and their overall payroll. So within each tax schedule, the higher experience ratings tend to have higher tax rates. The lower experience ratings are at the lower end of those tax schedules. So most of what we're paying out this year, I mentioned, isn't going to be charged. We've paid out over $6.1 billion in benefits. Well over half of that has been federal benefits, so they aren't chargeable to employers for their experience rating, and it doesn't impact their tax ratings. In addition, there's provisions right now that let a lot of benefits that normally are chargeable to employers not be charged to them, like work share benefits and some of the other pieces that are being paid out. In terms of the overall structure of money coming in and money going out, federal law does require that unemployment insurance benefits get funded by payroll taxes. So fundamentally, over time, any dollar of benefits that we pay out has to be funded by that unemployment insurance tax coming in. And there are still a lot of benefits now because of the big recession that we've seen and the huge demand for benefits that are coming out of the state funds that are impacting employers' experience ratings. The way that Oregon adjusts when the money comes in to the fund in taxes compared to when the benefits are paid out works really well. Oregon has stayed solvent and hasn't had to borrow money, and I'll talk about that in just a second. The idea is that we try to build up reserves during economic good times so that when we're in a recession, we can afford to have the broad safety net that supports workers and communities without having to borrow money or do other things that have longer term, bigger costs for businesses and for everyone else. So Oregon's system does work better than most other states in terms of that balancing of the trust fund. And in fact, it's worked well enough that for the past decade, we have either been staying at the same tax schedule or moving down. So that's a really long period of not seeing any increase in the tax schedules. For the past 3 years, we've actually been trying to collect less in unemployment insurance payroll taxes than we projected being paid out in benefits. So we were essentially in a situation where the trust fund was solvent enough that we were trying to kind of give a structured tax break to all of the tax-paying employers on their unemployment insurance taxes. So we're going to Schedule 4, which we kind of call the baseline or equilibrium schedule. That's where normally it would result in us trying to collect the same amount in payroll taxes as we think we'll pay out in benefits. I mentioned earlier, because of the timing of when those projections are made, it actually looks like we'll be collecting a lot less in 2021 than we'll be paying out in benefits. But over the long term, it really is a matter of when you collect the taxes to fund the benefits, because every dollar paid out has to come in. Most of the time, the point that we're at in a recession isn't the worst time for trust funds. Usually the most risky time for running out of money is about a year or two after the recession starts. And there are things that can be done to look at how to change the tax structure. I know that employers want to have the taxes be lower, especially during these difficult times. Ultimately, if the statutory formula is changed to keep taxes lower in the short term, there's really kind of 3 potential paths that it goes down. If taxes are being kept lower now, it means either that we'll have to have higher taxes for longer later on to then replenish the trust fund and the reserves, or we'll end up needing to borrow money later to fund some of those benefits. And that's problematic because that ends up meaning that employers are repaying not just the benefits being paid out, but also interest on the borrowed money and other debt costs, as well as I mentioned, frequently seeing some reduced federal tax credits. The third option is to reduce the amount of benefits that are going out. Those are kind of really at a high level, the variables of how things have to balance out. And I'll close with a little bit of context, and then again, we'll be sending out information with some of this in writing. In terms of states that are borrowing money, it doesn't look like Oregon will need to borrow money to recover from this recession if we stick with the statutory formula that's in place now. As of a couple days ago, 21 states have already started borrowing money. They've borrowed over $42 billion. That is expected to grow a lot as we continue to go through the recovery from the recession. We do have some information on the breakdown of what employer tax rates are for 2021. There's a little over 145,000 businesses in Oregon that pay unemployment insurance payroll taxes. And we looked at kind of how many employers saw their tax rates go up or down between 2020 and 2021. It's a relatively small percentage, a little over 3.5% of employers are going to have the same tax rate next year as they do this year. About 11% of employers are actually going to see their unemployment insurance tax rate go down. By far, the biggest category is about 2/3 of employers will see their tax rates go up by between 0.1 and 1% from what it was in this year, 2020. And then the remainder have kind of different amounts of increase. And again, we'll send some of that information out so you can see that breakdown. And I certainly know that for the folks that are in the categories, if their business is the one that is seeing a higher than anticipated increase, it doesn't really matter whether they're part of a really small number. We certainly understand that still has a real impact on their business. So hopefully this kind of broad context is helpful, and really wanted to reserve most of the time to try to answer questions or have discussion about things that you had. So I'll kind of turn it over to PJ to moderate that now.
Thank you, David. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and questions will be asked in the order that they are put in. Remember, if your question is not about employer taxes or the UI Trust Fund, we will put it in our parking lot and follow up with you after this meeting. If you're joining us by phone, please make sure to hit *6 to unmute yourself so you could ask your question. Okay, so, or you may raise your hand. So if you raise your hand, we also will call on you.
I'll go ahead and read this one. I think we're all adjusting to how to do this. Representative Bynum asked, is the date to appeal your rate fixed in statute? It is. There's actually a 2-stage challenge process. We sent the notices out in mid-November. That's the statutory time frame. I think by statute, it's supposed to be by November 15th that we send it out. We give the employers some information that includes basically the math formula of how we computed their experience rating. So we show the benefits that were charged to their account. And then we also show the overall payroll and the division that goes on to come up with the ratio. And then we include the grid that shows, depending on what their experience rating is, what their tax rate will be. The first step to challenge that is they can ask us to review or reconsider that tax rate. So they can ask us and say, essentially, we think you made a mistake. We think there were charges in there that shouldn't have been, whatever the situation is. We review that to see if we made a mistake. It is a largely mathematical process to determine the rate, but mistakes are possible. So if we see that there was a mistake, we fix it and we can issue an amended tax rate notice. If we either don't change it or we issue an amended one that the person still disagrees with, they do have the right to request a hearing. And I don't have the statute in front of me. Most of our timeframes are either 20 or 30 days, but we can get you what that is. It's on when we review the request for reconsideration, we tell them how to appeal it and what the deadline is for challenging that. And that time period is in statute.
Thank you, David. So to raise your hand, there's a button on the bottom center of the screen. And if you click that button, then we will know that you would like to ask a question.
And this certainly isn't the only opportunity to talk to us about the unemployment insurance taxes. Representative Bynum, it looks like it is a 20-day statutory time period to appeal.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to unmute people so they can ask questions that way. So if you have a question and you want to speak up.
So I can, there are a couple questions coming in, and I will go ahead while people are being added and try to take these. So
Okay.
I think Jen Nordland was asking if the rates are tied to the industry the employer is in, as well as the actual experience rating. And the answer to that is no. Once we determine what the tax schedule is, each employer's individual tax rate is really determined by looking at what their experience rating is and how it compares to every other Oregon employer's experience rating. It is not separated out into different industry sectors. It's just the schedule and comparative experience rating that really determines the rate.
Oh, and then, so we have a question from Representative Susan McLean. And she wants to know if the information that you're providing, is it shared in writing someplace?
We do have a lot of information about the unemployment insurance taxes out there in writing. And as I said, we're going to be sending some written materials to you all as follow-up that has some of this broken down. We are continuing to do more analysis on things to see how things kind of compare year to year. And certainly some groups are interested in different parts of this than of the process than others, but we can also provide links to where some of our public facing information is too, in case that's helpful for either you or for the businesses that you're representing.
Okay, and you may have already answered this, David, but just in case. So Lauren Morrison wanted to know if you can talk a little bit more about payroll taxes and the tax credit.
Sure. So most of what we're talking about, really the main focus of this is the state unemployment insurance tax that goes to funding unemployment insurance benefits that come out of the state trust fund. There's also a federal payroll tax. FUTA is the pay stub abbreviation that most people are familiar with. That's the Federal Unemployment Insurance Tax Act obligation that employers have. Federal law sets that tax rate at 6%, but says that if a state has an unemployment insurance program that complies with all of the federal requirements, that 6% tax rate is reduced to 0.6%. So they get a 5.4% credit against that federal obligation. When we've done the math in the past, that works out to over $1 billion a biennium in the impact if we were to lose that tax credit. So it's a big deal. If a state borrows money and doesn't repay it quickly, and typically that means, I believe, within a quarter, although the timing can depend, then they start to lose increments of that tax credit. So that would mean that when Oregon employers went to pay their federal taxes, instead of being a 0.6% FUTA tax, it would be some higher amount, whether it's 1.2 or it could conceivably go up to the full 6%.
Okay, instead under Kate Lieber wants to know, how does the UI trust fund work? She said a primer would really be helpful, and we will be doing that. But can you talk a little bit more about how trust fund works?
Sure, and we are going to be doing, for folks that are interested, trying to do kind of a high level overview of unemployment insurance, because it can get incredibly technical, as some of you who know the system incredibly well know. And we want to make sure folks have the level of information they want. But at a high level, it is that the state unemployment tax that we're talking about really goes just to fund unemployment insurance benefits. And as long as states do that, we kind of collect the money over time. It goes into a state trust fund that is actually held by the federal government, and we're allowed to use that money only to pay for benefits, really. and what we're talking about is the cycle of when we collect the taxes so that we can have the money in reserves to pay the benefits out. And typically what happens is we tend to collect less during a recession than we're paying out, like now and like will happen next year. And it's as you get farther into the recovery that the tax rates then go up higher to replenish the trust fund and kind of rebuild those reserves. Next year, we're looking at still seeing our trust fund balance go down over the course of the year as we continue to have a lot of people needing to receive benefits. And that's a super high level. We will give more detail in kind of the overview of how that plays into the overall unemployment insurance program with the benefits pieces too.
Okay, and so right now we're waiting for a few more questions.
Hey, David, this is Rep. Bynum again. Since nobody's going, I wanted to ask another question with your permission.
Of course.
It's somewhat of an economic question, and I wondered when I saw some of the states reopening their economies regardless of the COVID circumstances in their state or their numbers. And I wondered if it was related to their trust fund solvency, and if you can back that out into thinking that the sooner we get people back to work and the sooner we can get our COVID numbers under control, it will have a positive impact on the taxes that employers are going to pay, and it'll have a positive impact on the number of employers that are able to stay in business.
So I would really hesitate to guess as to what is going into the incredibly complex decisions that states are making about kind of how to ease or narrow the restrictions on business activities to deal with the pandemic. So the motive, I don't know. In terms of the impact, I think you're absolutely right that the long-term least expensive thing for all the businesses in terms of the unemployment insurance taxes, let alone all the other impacts, is to get people back at work as quickly as possible. Right now, a lot of those benefit costs aren't being borne by the state trust fund, but some of them certainly are, and that's going into why we have more benefits being paid out, and over time more UI taxes have to be collected. But if economies are able to fully reopen and kind of have all industries rehire large numbers of employees, that would certainly make a big difference in terms of how many people are unemployed and how many people are getting benefits. So that certainly would save money in the long run from the trust fund. I hope that got to your question.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other questions you'd like to ask us through the chat box, or if you'd like to ask us just directly, you may do so.
And again, this won't be the last chance. We really do just want to make sure that we're giving you all the information that you need as you're making policy decisions. So if questions come up later, let us know. And we're, I think, as everyone is during these times, experimenting with different ways of trying to do it. So we'd also be interested in hearing your feedback on whether this is helpful for giving this kind of information, or if you'd prefer something else. And since I can't see anyone, I'm happy to stick around as long as people want to talk or ask questions about this. But usually my interest in unemployment insurance tax formulas, I can enjoy talking about it more than other people can. So I understand if you have the information that you need, we certainly don't want to keep you from the other things that you have.
And to that point, David, if you didn't get your question answered, or if you need anything else, remember you can send an email to oed_legislative_affairs@oregon.gov. And we will send a summary of today's meeting, as well as links and other useful collateral. Thank you very much for joining us today. Have a good day.